The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for a special National Farm to School Network webinar. We'll give everyone just a few minutes to jump on the line and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us, everyone, for February National Farm to School Network topical webinar, Advancing Equity Through Farm to School. We'll give everyone just a few more moments to get on the line, and then we'll get started with the webinar. Welcome, and thanks to everyone for joining us for a special National Farm to School Network webinar, Advancing Equity Through Farm to School. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. We've got a lot of great content to share. A few housekeeping reminders before we get started. This webinar will be recorded and archived for any future viewing opportunities in the National Farm to School Network resource database. You'll also receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email, along with links and resources shared by the speakers today. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to have and ask questions to our panelists. So please enter those questions in the question box on your control panel throughout the webinar, and we'll have a good amount of time for question and answer at the end of our session. My name is Lacey Stevens, and I'll be your host today. I'm a program manager with the National Farm to School Network. Welcome again to today's webinar, Advancing Equity Through Farm to School. Again, we've got a great lineup for you today. We'll start with Anupama Joshi, National Farm to School Network's Executive Director and co-founder, and she'll share with us National Farm to School Network's commitment to equity. Then we'll hear from 3 of the National Farm to School Network core partners about how they're working to advance equity through farm to school. Don Krakel will share with us from Food Corps Connecticut. We'll hear from Onalisa Martinez from Farm Fresh Rhode Island, and then Jenna Rhodes and Nick Stevens from Access to Healthy Foods Research Group at Arkansas Children's Research Institute. And finally, we'll wrap up with some questions and robust discussion. I'll start with a very brief look at Farm to School and the National Farm to School Network for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Starting with the whys of Farm to School, what we like to call the triple win. The triple win we see is kids winning, farmers winning, and communities winning. Kids who participate in Farm to School eat more servings of fruits and vegetables. By shortening the supply chain, farmers keep a bigger share of their dollar, and communities win when farmers reinvest in their local communities and kids take what they learn home to share with their families. Farm to School, as many of you know, sits uniquely at an intersection of numerous sectors, and these cross-sectorial benefits include public health, education, economic development, and environment. And as we'll see in today's webinar, because of this unique position of Farm to School can be a unique strategy to advance equity in multiple sectors and across these multiple communities. So the National Farm to School Network is an information advocacy and networking hub for communities working to bring local food sourcing, school gardens, and food and agriculture education into schools and early care and education settings. And as you can see here, we truly are a network reaching across the United States. We've got our National Staff and Advisory Board, an incredible group of nearly 200 core and supporting partner organizations in every state, and many in every state. And we'll hear from 3 of those today. And then we have a network of over 15,000 members who are building and bolstering Farm to School across the country. As this hub for information, networking, and advocacy, we work to connect people to resources, people to people, and people to policy. We'd like to invite you to future opportunities to connect with resources and people by attending these other upcoming webinars. And information about these webinars and opportunities to register can be found in your chat box right now. In March, we've got a Trending Topics webinar focused on engaging farmers in Farm to School. In April, we have a Trending Topics webinar focused in family engagement through farm to early care and education. Another exciting opportunity we have to share with you is our upcoming National Farm to Cafeteria Conference, taking place in Cincinnati, Ohio, April 25th to the 27th. This biennial event will convene more than 1,000 diverse stakeholders working to source local food for institutional cafeterias and foster a culture of food and agricultural literacy across America. This is the premier opportunity for farm to cafeteria networking and learning that will take your farm to school and early care and education work to the next level. Learn more about the program, and registration is now open at farmtoschool.org/conference. With that, I'd like to turn it over to National Farm to School Network co-founder and executive director Anupama Joshi to further share with us National Farm to School Network's commitment to equity. Anupama?
Thanks, Lacey, and thanks everybody for joining us on today's webinar. It is extremely exciting to see the interest in this webinar and in this topic. I'm going to start us off with this quote from Dereka Blackman: "Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a practice. Equity is a goal." This quote has really resonated with the National Farm to School Network's learning and activities so far in this work, and I'm sharing this as a guiding frame for our conversation today. Advancing racial and social equity is a key organizational priority for the National Farm to School Network. It is articulated in our strategic plan, in our theory of change, and we are on a path towards making changes in our programming, our internal operations, and in our structure. We've identified 5 key ways that the National Farm to School Network can contribute to this work, and I'm going to dig deeper into each one of them. But they are, first, starting with acknowledging the inequities in our food system. Second, leveraging farm to school as a strategy for change. Third, communicating our commitment. Fourth, sharing our journey with others, such as all of you who are joining us today. And fifth, inviting you and others to join us in our journey and in our path. Next slide. So the first thing that we think our role is to really acknowledge the inequities in our food system and understand the underlying reasons for disparities to access to food and access to land as well. I'm not going to read all of these that are here. These are available on our website as well in our materials that we've created around our work for advancing racial and social equity. I'm just going to pick out a couple for you to reflect on. 1 out of 5 children are at risk of hunger, and the number is 1 in 3 in African American and Latino communities. Native Americans are twice as likely as white people to lack access to safe and healthy foods. And third, you see abysmal numbers here on the slide regarding farm ownership, especially in minority communities who work the land. Next slide, please. So the next thing that we wanted to do after we've acknowledged the inequities in our food system, we really see our role in leveraging farm to school and articulating the role that farm to school can have as a strategy for change. And the 3 core elements of farm to school that you see here, we feel are distinct approaches that can be used to advance racial and social equity. First, with the procurement of local foods, we can provide access to healthier school meals to more than 24 million students, and we can advance income generation and access to land ownership for marginalized food producers. Secondly, with school gardens, we can offer opportunities for students to develop a sense of responsibility and a connection to their community, as well as foster engagement and partnership through those connections inside the school setting and outside the school setting as well. And thirdly, with education about food and farming, we are elevating the value of local agriculture and lifting up the underrepresented stakeholders in the food system. So as you see, we are articulating how farm to school can be leveraged as a strategy for change for advancing racial and social equity. Next slide, please. The next thing that we want to do is to communicate our commitment to this work. And We are acutely aware of our shortcomings and barriers to progress, including the lack of leaders of color in farm to school and the challenges that can be faced as a network in coordinating efforts all across the country. We are also aware that our activities need to be informed and vetted by each of our partner organizations, but at the same time, that the network as a whole, as a collaborative entity, has a role and responsibility in the movement to push some uncomfortable conversations forward and bring equity to the forefront of all of our work. We also recognize that while we may be experts in farm to school, we still have much to learn about racial and social equity, and that we see our role being to facilitate deeper discussions and engagement with our partners and with our stakeholders to address issues through farm to school. And we also strive to be transparent in our intent, in our approach, and in our capacity to advance racial and social equity within the farm to school movement. Next slide. So we want to share our journey with you, and a couple of weeks back, we've created a web page focused on racial and social equity on our website. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would encourage you to do that. On this web page, you will see our overarching goals, and you'll also see some work that we've done so far. You'll also find a lot of resources that we have used that are available for you all to use. So our overarching goals in this work forward are to frame and promote racial and social equity as a central tenet of Farm to School. Second, offer training opportunities for our core and supporting partners, our stakeholders on the topic. Third, articulate clear organizational goals and outcomes and track our progress towards these. Fourth, elevate diverse leaders as our partners, advisors, and staff, and engage more and diverse constituencies and communities in the Farm to School movement. Fifth, explore and leverage opportunities for policy advocacy, programming, and partnerships around a diverse set of barriers to participation in Farm to School, including but not limited to race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and disability. And last but not the least, leverage the national network's information channels and resource creation to promote equitable access to Farm to School, be it through our blogs, our webinars such as this one, translation of materials into languages other than English, and the photographs and stories that we use to communicate about Farm to School and incorporating racial and social equity lens in that. Since 2014, we've made some strides towards what we've been able to do in this work, and we have still a lot to do. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight for you, and you can read these on the web page that I mentioned as well. Since 2014, we've convened 2 cohorts of Native community leaders and have provided training and networking opportunities for them. We've facilitated conversations with the USDA for easing barriers to incorporating traditional foods in school systems, and also included support for farm to school and Native communities in our federal policy asks. We have an equity in farm to early care and education subgroup that is exploring the complexities of equity in early care settings and elevating examples from diverse communities of color. Internally, the National Farm to School Network staff have participated in discussions and have participated in a 21-day racial equity habit building challenge hosted by Food Solutions New England for 2 years, and have engaged in ongoing discussions and learnings on the topic. We are striving to make our staff and our advisory board and partners more diverse and representative of our network and the Farm to School movement. And in early 2017, we made a strategic shift in our structure to focus resources and efforts at the state level and expand supports to the US territories, that we're now partnering with more than 200 diverse organizations, state agencies, and universities serving as core and supporting partners. And at the first meeting of these partners in May 2017, we had a training on racial and social equity within Farm to School, and participants were engaging sharing their own personal experiences, their biases, and their understandings. And obviously this topic resonated with some, it raised questions for others, and we recognized that this was only the beginning of a long path of discovery reflection and action with our partners and with our staff. Next slide, please. So we invite you to join us because we can grow stronger together. We want you to tell us what you're working on in advancing racial and social equity. What are your successes and what are your barriers? We want you to share useful resources so that others can benefit from them. The National Farm to School Network did an organizational equity assessment, and we encourage you to do that as well. We're happy to share more resources with you around that. And related to that, use that assessment to review your programs and your policies and tweak them as you feel appropriate. We encourage you to engage your staff and your stakeholders to discuss and engage in further conversations, such as this webinar, about your equity goals and about your journey towards those goals. And lastly, but not the least, I want to encourage you to join us at the 9th National Farm to Cafeteria Conference, April 25th through the 27th in Cincinnati, Ohio. You all over the years have really pushed us to incorporate more diversity at this conference and incorporate more conversations around equity at the conference and in our work. And we are hoping to deliver these at the conference. We have incorporated an equity lens in all the content around the conference, with the plenary speakers, with the field trips, and with other conference content as well. We have a short course that is focusing specifically around reframing food system work through an equity lens. And we have an entire workshop track that is focused on equity and social justice in Farm to Cafeteria. So if you haven't registered yet, registration is open. I encourage you to take a look at the agenda, and hope to see you in Cincinnati. I'm going to wrap up here, but I'm really excited to have a few of our National Farm to School Network partners who are here with us today to share their journey and their learning with you today around advancing racial and social equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anupama. And as Anupama mentioned, we'd love for you to further explore what we've shared through our commitment and our journey. And that link to that journey is in your chat box now, www.farmtoschool.org/equity. So now I'd like to turn this over to one of our core partners, Dawn Krayko from Food Corps Connecticut, to share the work that they're doing in Connecticut around advancing equity with Farm to School. Dawn?
Thanks, Lacey. I appreciate the opportunity to share something in our state, in Connecticut, that we're doing to advance equity within our program specifically. My name is Dawn Krayko, as Lacey said, and I'm the Connecticut Program Director for Food Corps. So I oversee our state program that has 20 AmeriCorps service members serving across 15 school districts in about 35 schools. And our service members are connecting kids to healthy food through hands-on learning, with lessons in the classroom or in the school garden, healthy school meals with taste tests, and other efforts to support a school-wide culture of health. So I'll preface my share with an acknowledgement that I believe there is much more we can be doing in this area, and this is an example of one area where we identified a need and had an opportunity to influence the culture of our program related to equity and inclusion. So in Food Corps, we prioritize and put resources and support behind recruiting a service member corps that's local to the communities and the students and the places where we serve. And on a day-to-day basis, our members are supervised by individuals based in school districts, schools, and nonprofits who may or may not have the experience, training, or practice that allows them to be a support to a service member that may come from a different background or with different experiences. So in Connecticut, we were feeling a level of responsibility of providing some diversity and equity training for our site supervisors and start the conversation for some who may not have been to a training or been to a training recently, and for them to understand how, from an organizational perspective, we're seeing equity inclusion and what that means for them and at their site. So we had a one-day required training for all Connecticut site supervisors that was supported as part of a USDA Farm to School grant that was written for some of our programmatic work on summer meals. And to make the most of the opportunity, we partnered with another food-focused service program in our state, the Connecticut Food Justice Vista Project out of UConn Extension, and opened it up to their site supervisors as well. It was hosted at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, which a lot of these photos on my slide are from. And that center is part of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, and it's located in Ledyard, Connecticut. It's a nonprofit educational institution focused on increasing knowledge and understanding of the richness and diversity of the indigenous cultures, really using Native voice to transform how they're represented. So we started the day with a guided tour of the museum to really understand the historical and cultural significance of the region, this particular region in Connecticut. And what followed was a training with consultants from a diversity and inclusion training organization, Visions, out of Dorchester, Massachusetts. Our goals were really to increase personal and site commitments to understand, foster, and embrace cultural differences. Visions incorporates a variety of approaches and techniques that get at what people think, what they do, and how they feel about cultural differences and changes. So we kind of stayed at the personal and interpersonal level, which seemed appropriate given that this was very, for some, an introduction to even to this topic, or spending a full day diving into this topic. And overall, the training was really well received by sites. And I think it was still just the beginning of a conversation and other learning opportunities we need to continue to have with sites as we welcome and embrace service members with a diversity of backgrounds and experiences. In reflecting on it, if I were to do it again, as our site supervisors can change over from year to year or after a few years, I'd probably prefer to do it before our recruitment period for service members, which was the intention, but became really challenging with scheduling, so that so it has an influence on recruitment of members from communities and efforts that we put into that. But I still think it opened minds some when it came to the process of interviewing and selecting food corps service members. So that was about a year ago now, and I'm very eager to find new ways to support this kind of learning, in person or otherwise, with our members and our sites, because I know this work is a journey and not a one-time and done thing or activity. So yeah, I appreciate the network providing this opportunity for us to learn from one another, and I'm hoping to take back some new ideas as well.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing your part of the journey. I really love how you underscored that it is a constant learning experience for all of us, and how you were able to identify that need within your organization and these first steps in addressing it. So thank you so much for sharing your story. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our partners from Rhode Island, Annalisa Martinez with Rhode Island Farm to School.
Hi, everyone. This is Annalisa. And I'm from Farm Fresh, Rhode Island. I'm the Nutrition Education Program Coordinator. Today, I'll be telling you the story of our food justice lesson that we had at a local high school. It was a couple years ago now. I think it's important to note that we had a wonderful civics teacher that reached out to us about setting up this food justice lesson, and we worked closely with her to come up with the series, and her support in this process has a lot to do with the success of the program. It's also important to mention, I think, that one of my coworkers and myself were of the community, and we shared the same ethnicity as many of the students, which allowed us to relate to the students and really deepen our conversations. Next slide, please. We started by asking this essential question. What does the food around us tell us about equity in our community? And this was the guiding question that we used for the class. And our hope was to get the students to think about food in the broader context of society. So it wasn't just about something that they ate or just about the nutrition in it. So we decided to go and show them this TED Talk that some of you guys may know about by Ron Finley, also known as the Guerrilla Gardener from South Central LA. And we shared this with the students to introduce the idea of food deserts and food-related diseases in a way that the students could relate to. If any of you have seen this TED Talk, Ron really talks in a real way, and it wasn't just scientific facts or numbers, which kind of ends up boring or not really getting the message across or the story across to students. Next slide, please. After talking about South Central LA, we wanted to bring it back home to the kids. So using Google Maps, we had them create a food map of their community. And we had them map their school community and then a neighboring community that was just one zip code over, but still in Providence. And they coded fast food joints, dine-in restaurants, supermarkets, bodegas, gas stations, liquor stores, and some farmers markets. And through this process, the students were able to discover for themselves that they lived in a neighborhood that had way more fast food restaurants and supermarkets, or even the dine-in restaurants. And they started to question why they didn't have access to these healthier foods on their own. And to make this a little bit more interesting, we gave them the income levels of both communities. And that's really all they needed to start talking about food injustice. As soon as we put those numbers up, they immediately started questioning or asking why and what communities lived in the east side of Providence and versus their community. So it really didn't take much to get those conversations started. Next slide, please. On the second day, we wanted to lighten the mood a little bit. So we shared local fresh fruits and vegetables with the class, and we did this in a fun way. We hosted a blind taste test, and we had them try local apple chips, yellow carrots, and pea greens. And they all took guesses, and the class had a blast. It was like a really cool icebreaker. And we shared the treats with the rest of the class and started to talk about our veggie box. Next slide, please. We introduced what is our version of a CSA box to the students and passed around gnarly fruits and vegetables while we talked about each of them. And some of these fruits and vegetables were totally unknown to the kids. I didn't know about them before working at Farm Fresh, things like kohlrabi and celeriac and spaghetti squash. And we passed these around, so they got to feel them and touch them and see them in person. Next slide, please. And now it was time for us to have some real fun. After they saw these weird New England winter fruits and vegetables, we asked them to work in teams to come up with a recipe using a couple of these items. So they had access to laptops and they went online and started doing research on some of these fruits and vegetables that they'd never even seen before. Next slide, please. And so the following class, we worked on building their cooking skills, and we made spaghetti squash lasagna, which was one of the winning recipes, along with fresh sweet potato fries. And they all really enjoyed this, getting their hands on these local goodies, and working with spaghetti squash, which many of them hadn't in the past. And spaghetti squash is just always like one of those fun things to work with because you get noodles at the end. And anyway, like the kids were just really excited about it. Next slide, please. And during this time, we just really had the opportunity to talk to the students about their experiences cooking at home, and deepen our relationship with them. There was music playing in the background, and there was just all around good vibes. And I think it's really important when you're talking to students about something as personal as food and injustices in their community to have and build a relationship with them. That's, I think, one of the ways that you can really get to talking seriously about these really heavy issues. Next slide, please. So having shared a great cooking experience and then instilling some confidence in them to work with fresh food products, we were back to talking about food justice. And we brought up the idea of food deserts. We have since adopted the term food apartheid, basically noting the intentionality of these quote unquote food deserts, that they're not just a natural occurrence. But we talked about the reason why cheap processed foods are so readily available in some neighborhoods and connected it back to the link that Ron Finley made about unhealthy foods and diseases and seeing a rise of different health centers in our communities due to these food-related diseases. Next slide, please. At our last lesson, we brought in a school nutrition chef, and he talked to the students about the regulations on school lunch, just to help them see what they had to work with on their back end. But then he also helped the students include a culturally relevant meal in their school lunch. And this is a meal that all of the students in the school voted on. Next slide, please. We were then invited to see the students share what they learned in our class at an American Heart Association event at the State House. And it was such an amazing experience to see like our students talking about what they've learned about food injustice and that direct link to health. It was just really exciting and to see all the work that they put into it, and we were just like very proud, and like I was there taking a million pictures of these students because I was so happy and they were so excited to see us when we came and showed up to support them. Next slide, please. And then to culminate our series, we held a family night, and with the students, we cooked delicious food and we sourced as much locally as possible. And families came and we all shared the delicious meals and talked. And it was wonderful, and we couldn't have asked for a better end to our series with this family night. Next slide, please. So your turn. If you guys would like to do something like this in your hometown or with your school or with a group of students, I have a couple points that I think are really important to note. One of them is the idea that you really have to engage the students to want to do this. And the way you do that is making it about them. So if they can't relate, especially with young adults, it's going to be difficult to get everyone on board, and you're going to have people not paying attention or not as into it. So really, if you make it about them and have them be able to tell their story, or like we connected it to the community through the mapping, then they get really excited, and then you can't really even stop the conversation because there's so many opinions and things that they want to include in the conversation. Another key takeaway is to make sure that there's some action-based lesson in there. You don't want to just give students really new information about injustices happening in their community and maybe even directly to them, and then kind of leave them to their resources. So that's why we tried doing cooking lessons and then bringing in the food school nutrition chef so that he can help them create some change that could actually happen immediately to keep them motivated and kind of thinking about being active and speaking up. And also, if a series is not an option, we've done this version that fits a one-time hour-long program where we just include the blind taste test because that's always fun and gets kids kind of like it's a good icebreaker. And we present the Ron Finley video and talk about food apartheid using our Google Maps, and typically we do the same thing with the different communities and the different income levels. Next slide, please. And finally, just touching up a little bit on the Food Solutions New England Racial Equity Challenge that's actually coming up in April. I encourage all of you to sign up. Farm Fresh has been doing this for a few years now, and every year it's amazing. It really gets us all talking about equity and race in the food system, and it's what our work is about. So it's really they're really important conversations, and we really use this time to come together as a group to talk about these things. And the link on here is one that shares resources when you sign up, so that you have readings and different articles that you can then share with your staff and talk about it. What we do, we've been doing in the past, is having some folks lead discussions. Some about, farmers of color, the makeup of our organization, and things like that. And the conversation doesn't just end, April 22nd at the end of the challenge. We try to continue it throughout the year. Next slide, please. And finally, if you guys have any questions, you can email me. You can also email my coworker, Michaela. And I want to thank you so much, and I hope this is a helpful presentation. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. Really so incredible to see just not that beyond that educational opportunity, but that opportunity for engaging youth in action and activism. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'll remind everyone that we will have some time for questions and answers at the end. So please do enter your questions into the question box, and Annalisa can address those questions at the end. But now we're going to move right along to our team from Arkansas. I'd like to introduce Jenna Rhodes and Nick Stevens. Jenna and Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lacey. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Rhodes. I'm Program Manager with the Access to Healthy Foods Research Group at the Arkansas Children's Research Institute, which is home to Arkansas Farm to School. We're the core partner for the state. And the purpose of the Access to Healthy Foods Research Group is to build evidence, capacity, and support for an equitable food system that fosters the health and wellness of children, families, and communities in Arkansas. And so in order to do that, we develop, deliver, and evaluate various individual and environmental level strategies for increasing access to healthy food, such as farm to school, school and community gardens, and support for increased local and healthy food production, distribution, and consumption. As part of that work, we're building capacity for farm to school in Arkansas through the development of a formal network and a leadership team, our website and social media presence, as well as through trainings and events for farm to school stakeholders. We've had a long-standing partnership with the Clinton School of Public Service, of which Emily and I are both alum, to serve as field service sites for their master's level students. And it was through that partnership that an opportunity arose to work with a student who needed an international public service project but wanted to complete that work here in Arkansas. And this aligned with some movement and some interest within our office to better understand how we could support our immigrant farmers in the state, specifically as it relates to their involvement in farm to school. So together we developed this project for Nick to execute over the course of last summer. Through Nick's project, we're now equipped with some baseline information about the landscape of immigrant farmers in our state and the services that exist to support them and where the gaps and challenges exist. So I'll hand it over to Nick now to describe the project and share his lessons learned.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Stevens, and I'm now finishing my second and final year at the Clinton School of Public Service for a master's in public service degree. And without further ado, I'm going to dive into an explanation of what this project was with you. So the project explored the question of what are the barriers and facilitators to farm to school participation for immigrant farmers in Arkansas. And our secondary question was, what can we learn from schools and organizations who already work well with immigrant populations in Arkansas? And to answer those questions, we first had to answer a handful of other questions like, who are the immigrant populations in our state? Where are they? And are they growing or farming? So as we move on to the next slide, I'll explain how we attempted to answer all these questions. So this slide and the next will give an overview of the research process. As you can see, we leaned heavily on the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey to get a high-level view of the landscape. We found out that our largest immigrant groups in Arkansas were Latin American, mostly from Mexico, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and Asian, mostly from India, Vietnam, and China. Additionally, we found that immigrants in Arkansas are far more concentrated in the western half of the state, particularly in our largest metropolitan areas. So we then used the USDA Census of Agriculture to zoom in, so to speak, on our farmers. This is where things got a bit fuzzy. The USDA Census is disaggregated by race ethnicity, but not by national origin. So we decided to focus on those counties where the USDA Census indicated large numbers of Asian and Hispanic farmers that overlapped with large numbers of immigrants, as indicated by the American Community Survey. So finally, we leaned on local knowledge. We knew that there was an important group that was missing, the Hmong. Our project was partly inspired by an initiative in Arkansas that sought to assist Hmong farmers in selling their produce to a local school district through partnership with their local farmers market. We knew from this and from our contact with the Hmong National Development Organization that there are a large number of Hmong farmers in the state. The Hmong are a distinct ethnic group of Southeast Asia, mostly from Laos. Since there were already projects to assist Hmong farmers with farm-to-school participation, we knew that we could learn a lot from those participating farmers and organizations. So this process helped me narrow my focus to Northwest Arkansas for site visits and in-person interviews, and Western Arkansas for phone interviews. It also gave me a starting place, the organizations and farmers involved in the Hmong Farmers Market and Farm to School project. Now, as we move on to our next slide, I'll explain how we found the farmers. We developed semi-structured interview protocols for interviews with what I called farmer support organizations. That is Extension, NRCS, farmers markets, etc. I also interviewed Hmong National Development and a number of school district child nutrition directors. Now, the primary goal of this stage was to find immigrant farmers who would be willing to be interviewed. In any equity building process, it's always of primary importance to involve and learn directly from those who you think may be excluded, rather than just learn about them. However, this process of interviewing farmer support organizations did serve a secondary purpose. It allowed me to begin answering the questions, what can we learn from schools and organizations who already work well with these immigrant populations in our state? And what barriers have these schools and organizations identified in their work with immigrant farmers? And so in the end, I was able to interview 9 farmers and 30 key informants from school and farmer support organizations from 11 counties across western Arkansas. Now we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll share briefly what we found. So this slide has a handful of the lessons we learned that we felt were informative for anyone seeking to support immigrant farmers in our state. But I think that there's some lessons that can be shared more generally. First, we learned that something that probably should have been obvious. Each immigrant population is unique. In Arkansas, Southeast Asian farmers are rather abundant. However, these populations benefit from organizations like Hmong National Development, who have been very active in promoting and supporting their members' entry into agriculture and development as growers. While many community organizations exist in our state for the Hispanic and Latin American immigrant community, I could not identify an organization that focused on agriculture in a similar way to Hmong National Development. So this leads to a second point. We found that immigrant farmers are often dealing with the same barriers as other new farmers. But these 3 items I've listed generally make it difficult for them to access the resources that are available to other farmers. That is the language, trust, and the limited network knowledge. Language is a bit obvious. People need resources and support in a language they can understand. Trust is more nuanced, and I'll discuss it in a moment. By limited network knowledge, I'm borrowing from the idea of social capital. What I mean is that often the immigrant farmer does not know about the resources and organizations that exist to support them. And no one that they know has knowledge of these supports either. So the chances of them finding out without explicit outreach and advertising is very low. Now, to explain trust, let me talk about this last bullet point. We learned that a very large proportion of our immigrant population, about 50%, are unauthorized. That is, undocumented or illegal. Now, unauthorized immigrants are obviously going to face huge hurdles in purchasing land, and they're often ineligible for many grants and loans. But what many don't understand is the shadow that this can create in a community. In certain areas of our state, immigration raids are increasingly common, and so trust is minimal between these communities and official government programs. Even when large numbers of individuals in a community are authorized with legal permanent residence or citizenship, if someone in a family is unauthorized, it can generate reluctance for anyone in the family to interact too heavily with officials and official services and organizations that they haven't built a trusting relationship with. Okay, so now we can move on to the next slide. And sorry, I'm sort of flying through this, but I want to make sure that I stay in my time and don't have to skip any of the good stuff. So here are the recommendations that emerged from what we learned. There are 4 big ideas with a number of detailed suggestions and examples. These are all practical ways to overcome the barriers of language, trust, and limited network knowledge. These are tailored to our state, but many of them may serve as a good starting point for your equity advocacy in your state as well. So that blue box of communicate effectively is all about actively seeking to connect your services to immigrant farmers and communities. The big idea is to inform them about what you have to offer. This is about overcoming those language and trust barriers in your own outreach. And the box that says identify and connect to partner resources is about building your capacity to connect immigrant farmers to other services that are out there for them that they often do not know about. This is about building up that network knowledge that I spoke about earlier. And the bottom box, partnering to create new resources, is how we can take all of this a step further. There are so many resources available, but once we've mapped out what is there, I'm sure that many of us will find gaps to fill, and we can partner to fill those gaps. And finally, that top left box that I skipped, the USDA Farm Census and the U.S. Census directly inform the focus and funding of state and national organizations who support farmers and immigrant communities. It will be easier to generate resources and secure funding for these groups if they are accurately represented. And so we can go to the next slide, please. And in order to share the lessons that we learned, we've created profiles of immigrant farmers in the state that are tailored specifically to inform the farmer support organizations. They include some demographic information, lessons learned from the study, and the recommendations. Now the Access to Healthy Foods Group and Arkansas Farm to School will work to share these profiles while working to incorporate the recommendations in their own work as well. And on the last slide, I've included a few links that might be helpful to you if you decide to embark on some demographic research of your own. I really enjoyed carrying out this project, so I'm glad to have gotten to share it with you all. This wraps up what I have for you today, and I'll look forward to answering any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jenna and Nick. What a fascinating perspective, and so much we can learn from your work and how it connects back to these opportunities to advance equity through these various farm-to-school approaches. So again, as you do have questions for our fantastic panelists, please enter those into your question box. We've got about 15 minutes left for question and answers, and we'll get through as many as we can. A few questions coming in that I'll address right away. Some folks asking you about recordings of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded. You'll receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email, and it'll also be archived in the National Farm to School Network resource database, and you can always access it there. We've also added in to your question chat box the link to the 21-day challenge that was mentioned by Onalisa. So it would be great if your organizations could explore the opportunity to participate in that as well. And we have a few questions coming in. I'll get started. This question, I think it would be a great opportunity for each of our panelists to answer. So the question involves managing staff time for working on equity. How can you ensure that you have enough staff time to work on equity and fund that time that staff uses to promote equity within the work, and make sure that that is an embedded part of the work that you're doing? So funding around staff time for equity. Let's start this question with Jenna and Nick. Could you speak a little bit to that in your organization?
Sure, I can try. So, I think that we had a really great opportunity, and I would highly recommend this to any other states listening, to partner with graduate schools who are who work and care about issues that you work on and care about. The Clinton School of Public Service has been an amazing partner for us. And so using a graduate student who had to do a project for graduation requirements was a really great way for us to work in equity to the work that we do, because I think, similar to many of you, there isn't a lot of extra time, I feel like, to do specific equity work. I think something else that might help, and I think that we're beginning to talk about here, is really fitting in equity, building equity into the grant writing process. So on the front end, really thinking about how we can include equity in the work that we're doing so that it is included in our grant funded time. I think that is also another way to do it. I think partnerships and collaborations. So kind of any way that you can get a twofer, if that's a way that you might understand it better, but partnerships, collaboration, being more intentional, because I do think that there is such limited time and money to pay for staff to work specifically on equity. But when equity becomes integrated into the work that you're already doing, it's just part and parcel of everything that you're working on, then you don't have to differentiate it. You just do it right alongside with all of the other work that you're already doing. So that would be my suggestions.
Thanks, Jenna. I wanted to open up to Anupama or Dawn and Onalisa. Would you have anything to add to that?
Sure, I can jump in. I totally echo what was just said, that Jenna shared in terms of intentionality and sort of integration of this work. So from the National Farm to School Network's perspective, this work is a strategic organizational priority, and so it has been included in in job descriptions. It is included in job plans for staff. It is included in performance reviews, and we've also created sort of systems for, or a space for staff to share and discuss different things that we're reading. So we have monthly calls for staff that are focused on this, and we take we read something together and discuss it, or we look at what our sort of action plan for the year is in terms of advancing this work. So again, it's not a separate thing that needs to be done, but it is incorporated within the existing systems that that are out there for supporting staff time. I mean, staff time needs to be supported, so it's not a separate thing. It is integrated, as Jenna mentioned, for us as well.
Great. Dawn and Annalisa, do you have any additional perspectives you'd like to share on that?
This is Dawn. I don't think I would add anything else. I would echo everything that was said, and just say that Food Corps, like the National Farm to School Network, is doing everything that we can to bake this into our work. And as a staff member, it was really helpful for me to build it into the work planning process and goal setting for the year, so there are explicit actions that are being taken, or when a goal is formed, that it has that lens. I mentioned this when I shared, but that we were just on the resource end, we were able to get funding through some of for our training, at least through the USDA Farm to School grant, and whenever possible, partner with other organizations doing this work in our state.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think that at our organization, it's also a priority. So there's hasn't really been ever a time where money comes and plays into it. Again, it's just a priority that we have.
Great. Great information. I know this is a question that we receive a lot, so it's really helpful to hear your various organizations' perspective, and they all sound very similar in making it a real core of the work that you're doing, and ensuring that it's integrated in all of those different funding opportunities. This question is, I'll start with Anupama. Anupama, could you speak a little bit further about the National Farm to School Network's equity assessment that we conducted internally?
Sure, happy to. So we've done one iteration of the equity assessment, and are sort of ready or slated to do another one. This was done, staff did the assessment, and the one that we used, the tool that we used was from Race Matters, which is something that we access through the Annie EKC Foundation resources. You can look them up online. Actually, I think they're linked on our website equity page as well, if you want to take a look. But yeah, we found that it was helpful to use that tool and then use it for staff to reflect on and then discuss it.
Great. And this is kind of following along with that equity assessment question. I'd love to hear from the other panelists how you build your own internal organizational capacity to be leaders around equity, and build your own internal capacity to teach others about equity in Farm to School.
This is Jenna, since no one else is jumping in. I think this is a continued area of improvement for us here in our state, because I am not an expert in equity, and so we really lean a lot on the national network actually for guidance and direction, resources, suggestions, and that kind of continued push. As a core partner, we have, the national network sets expectations for the core partners, and so I think it's through that, I think that we continue to kind of keep it, it keeps it in the front of our mind, and resources like this webinar and other things that we get through and from the national network are really helpful. So I think it's just through, just the continued conversation at the national level that it continues to be a conversation here in our state. I think we're still learning and still figuring out what that really means and what it looks like, and how we do it on a daily basis, and how we integrate it into our work going forward and the work that we're already doing. So yeah, I think just thanks to Anupama and the leadership team of the network, and for just continued guidance and support in helping us figure out at the state level how to do it better.
That's great to hear, Jenna. And I'll just echo that many of those resources that we do share are available at farmtoschool.org/equity. And again, this is a continued conversation and learning opportunity for us. We appreciate all of that input. Onalisa or Dawn, do you have any input on how you're working internally to promote and your capacity to be leaders around equity and share learnings around equity?
Yeah, I think that this is work that I'm really passionate about, and I'm lucky to work with an organization that is also passionate and finds it really important. So whenever we're looking to write up some new farm to school curriculum, this is something that we actively think about, and how we can build this into not just for high school students, but middle school students and elementary school students, and all of our other farm to school, farm to senior programs.
Lacey, if I can jump in with two other things I wanted to add. This is Anupama. I think there's a lot of expertise within the National Farm to School Network. I know that the national staff really benefited from a training and an overview that we got from our Colorado state partner a couple of months back, Live Well Colorado, and their process and their journey. They shared that with us, and did a session with us as NFSN staff, which we found really helpful. So there's expertise within the network that you can tap into, and then you can also, there are also external consultants that we have used and continue to use to build our capacity and build our expertise and learning on this. So that's another way of sort of building internal capacity to do this work.
Great. A lot of great resources around there to help support and continue this conversation. One more slightly logistical question for the Arkansas team. Jenna and Nick, so with this great information, and now you have this kind of bigger picture of the experience for immigrant farmers in Arkansas, what do you see as the next opportunity to help increase opportunities and connections between school food service staff and those immigrant farmers, and help kind of facilitate or build capacity for those purchasing opportunities for farm to school between those immigrant farmer communities and school food service?
So this is Nick, and I'll let Jenna follow me. But what the strategy that I see as really important is that with the school food service directors that I interviewed, they spoke a lot about, I would love to work with immigrant farmers, but I really lack the time, just like a lot of people are asking about. I don't have the time to work on equity. I don't have the time to overcome these language barriers or cultural barriers. And so I think one of the things that I learned, and I think is a big lesson learned from this whole project, is that there are resources out there. There's so many amazing resources through extension services and NRCS that do translation. In Arkansas, the Western Farm Credit has a specific staff position who translates everything they do into Spanish and does oral translation on the spot over the phone. NRCS has the same national service for on-the-spot oral translation for any of their offices that they can call and have Chinese translation, Spanish translation, so many different languages. And so I think a first step for food service staff in trying to connect with these communities is to know what partners and resources are out there, so that even if they feel that they can't dedicate the time to this, they can direct these immigrant farmers that approach them to the services that they need to build their capacity, and that can help them engage with them as well.
Yeah, and I would follow that kind of from the other side, which is, as we take this work forward and share this work out among all of the support organizations that do work with immigrant farmers, that we educate them about the kind of that opposite communication channel, which is, if you are working with immigrant farmers, educating the support organizations about Farm to School, how it works, so that they can educate the farmers about how to connect, and that those support organizations could then be a liaison between the farmer and the school to really make that final connection. So it kind of you're sort of triangulating, right, between the buyer, the seller, and the support organization, and that everyone is kind of getting educated about the other two legs of the triangle, so that everyone is aware and educated and can relay messages and resources and connect and all of that. So I would echo what Nick says, but then also from the other direction, with support services actually helping farmers connect and offer translation services and things like that, and then further connect them to us so that we can then connect them with the schools that we're connected with. And so it really is always, for me, it always comes back to that idea of connection and relationship building.
Great. Thanks for that insight. It's wonderful. We have come to the end of our hour. I want to give a sincere thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their experiences and their journey. Thank you to all of you for joining us for the webinar, and we hope that you'll continue to join us for our journey in advancing equity through Farm to School. Please check out the farmtoschool.org/equity, where we share our experiences and the resources that have been helpful to us. And don't hesitate to reach out to the National Farm to School Network to share with us your learnings, your challenges, and be a part of our journey, because we do grow stronger together. Thank you. Have a great day, and we look forward to learning and continuing this journey with you.